have an outsider perspective. And when someone like me shows up at the High Commission in Pakistan here in London and says, I'm going to be reporting on mining in Pakistan and I need a journalist visa, there's really a reaction. And the kind of visa that I was able to get was 7 days, Karachi only. And where I was staying, they assigned me a security guard, and who is a former brigadier general, who said they wouldn't want me to wander into any tribal territories. Now, because the funniest thing can happen on the way to the Karachi Conference Center, but that really is a message about, what they wanted my movements to be like. And for the purposes of what I was reporting, that was okay. But journalist movements are definitely restricted to some extent. At the same time, I did do my best to interview the different sides and make sure I'm getting commentary from all sides. So if the issue is like an elephant, it's a bit like trying to get an idea of how each, what part each side is feeling. That's okay. And for the sake of time, I am just going to kind of.
I think just into it.
Perfect. So this is actually me. I guess what I should also say is I've never actually been in Balochistan, which is really too bad. But I have visited mine sites, and this is kind of a bit of an amalgamation of what that actually looks like. It's like talking to the community, seeing the projects that they're funding, but also the incredible weight of industry on the landscape. If you see, this is slurry being, and the environmental toll that can take, as well as, the rocks in the ground that are being pulled out for profit and how that is being shared. That's really just a bit of an introduction. I was in, I was reporting on several projects, but notably the Recodique project, which I hope most of you are somewhat familiar with. A lot of people have no idea where it is, and when I explain to them that it's that dot between Iran and Afghanistan, they're like, that's quite the piece of real estate to develop. Graveyard of majors, that's, if Afghanistan is the graveyard of empires, then I think Recodique potentially might be the graveyard of majors, as it is, the company is embroiled in many, many international, provincial court battles of various forms that are very expensive. Cherie Blair, Tony Blair's wife, represented Balochistan recently in court. And I could take you through all of those things, but it is a legal nightmare. The company, which is a Chilean-Canadian consortium, is losing badly, and it is likely that the next step will be a tender process for this piece of property. Although it's predicting the future is, but that is likely what will happen. Also in the area is MCC, which is one of the largest state-backed Chinese firms developing Sindac, and they were renewed for their license, which ended in 2012. They were renewed earlier than it even expired for another 5 years. So just while we have one company being, clearly removed from the picture, we have another that is being treated as someone who can have a long-term vision to continue to develop the resource. I know this is really language heavy, but this just gives you an idea of, I'm generalizing a bit, which is always hard with this stuff, but this just gives you an idea of the stuff people tell me, right? From the international perspective, or the people that are going to invest and put money into projects in the hundreds of millions of dollars, they are worried that the project can just simply be taken from them after they have invested that money. And that really is what is happening with Recodique for various reasons. Again, I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing. That's not, this is observations and not necessarily endorsements or criticisms of anything. And then, for people who have a really national view, they're saying, if we can build an atom bomb, why can't we build a gold mine? And that's a very interesting argument, and it also brings me to the issue of nuclear tests, which were conducted in that very region, and to this day, obviously there's some feelings towards being selected for that, as well as certain unfortunate churning in the government as a result of people trying to stop that from happening. I might add that the first major company, BHP, signed the contract for developing it before the nuclear tests were conducted. And that's significant as well. And then we have someone from the provincial government who basically said that, there is employment, and there was clearly some support from the community for this project. There is, we see it happening, English language training, and there is the level of employment, and they should just be allowed to continue. And this is not political, but bureaucratic in nature. Whatever someone might think about that. That's just what was said to me. I think it is naive to think that anything being developed for money in that area is not, to some degree, political. And then we sort of come to, really this comes from Noordine himself, which is foreign companies should stay out until it's no longer a conflict zone, because they are in some ways funding activities, they are taking our own resources to then fund activities that suppress us. And that is grotesque. So, and that really, and even if there is community support, that is very short-term in nature and is not thinking in the longer term. Right, so that just gives you an idea of what the different sides tell me, and what I'm kind of reporting out there. Is there anything I missed? Nope, I just moved the slide, thanks. So then, now, Recodique is really not the big issue, but it does give you an idea. It's like a small example of the much larger picture. And the truth is, in the middle of an energy crisis, it's really oil, gas, because Pakistan is in an energy crisis, and those particular commodities become increasingly important. And so these are, as far as I can tell, these are really some of the major issues going on in there, which is really with Chamolang coal is one of them. And last year there were roadblocks, because people feel that the agreement that was made wasn't made with the right representatives of the region. You need to understand, though, how incredibly difficult it is for an international investor to understand who it is exactly that they're supposed to speak with. You have mining legislation. You have the paperwork that you are supposed to fill out in order to give you rights to develop a property. But an international investor, it's very difficult for them to understand who it is that they're supposed to really negotiate with, and who potentially just might be trying to hone in on the deal. And I'm not just, that is a perspective that is out there, and it can be incredibly difficult to distinguish, which is why indigenous land rights and making sure that people who have traditional claims to land have all of that on paper is very important to the mining industry right now. I might add, in preparing for this presentation, I realized I needed to update myself on what is happening with some of these projects. And if you Google Chamolang coal, and I recommend it, it says, I think the Pakistani Army's gift to the nation. And and that's all I think I can leave on that note. Sui gas field, incredibly strategic resource for Pakistan, obviously. There's a lot of resentment about the fact that it was discovered in, I think, 1950s, that gas started flowing to Islamabad in the 60s, but not to Quetta until the 80s. And so a lot of people are asking, okay, so we're supplying the gas, but how is it that we are not receiving electricity from it? And that is a legitimate question. Gwadar Port has just recently made big headlines because it was handed from Singapore to China. China built it. There was violence and there was trouble. Some engineers died on their way to work on it. It was still finished on time. And it's just been recently handed over to China. And just, I mean, again, you can't ever lose the context of the, it's a port as well as construction to a region which also has access to Iran and Afghanistan. And the geopolitical significance of that is not lost on anyone I have ever spoken with. And the pipelines are the other thing that is quite a contentious issue. The Iran-Pakistan pipeline right now, I think the only thing they're haggling about now is the price that the gas is going to be going through at. But, people are putting signatures on paper. It's going. And the other one is TAPI, which is Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline. And India has just approved a formidable budget for its construction just recently. So that looks quite promising as well. And, I bet you can guess which economic superpowers like which pipeline. Because there's one side backing one and one side backing the other. And that's really a sui gas field, I should say, too, right now, has just gone into a loss of profits. A significant loss in profits, lots of finger pointing over whose fault that is. And I was reading an article where there was a couple of explosions recently around it. And they were like, well, could have been Baloch nationalists, could have been the Taliban, probably the Taliban, And that's really, as a journalist, I take fairly care, even in quoting, sort of take care to back things up with facts. I think that's quite a thing to just be reported really flippantly. Okay, probably the Taliban. And thank you. And then it shouldn't be lost that there is a very large global context around this, of which this is wholly inadequate, but in the time I have. The notion that the extractive industries and people with traditional claims to land and that battle is on in every corner of the world. There's nowhere that doesn't exist. And that's actually why I put up a picture, which is does anyone know Idle No More? Does anyone know what that refers to? Chief Teresa Spence, who is pictured there, is in a community in Northern Ontario, and she started a hunger strike, making some demands to speak with the Prime Minister, and with varying degrees of success with how it went. However, she did spur a rather large movement, and this is Canada. Peaceful, law-abiding, Canada, where we all hold hands, and I'm Canadian, sorry, dance and the merriment of joy and peace, which is really the image that is projected about it. But there, too, there is enormous concern from Aboriginal communities all over, but especially where oil is, about the development of oil, the pipelines that are coming through, China's investment in the region. All of it, I could just repeat the story and use the Canadian context, and that's important to understand, that is a problem everywhere. And I tried to find a good example, let's find a good example where everything is working properly. Really one doesn't exist, and even the ones where I would say are very promising, I have no idea what will happen in a couple, I might say that looks great, and in a couple of months, there's big problems. They do erupt. But if you look at all the stuff happening before they erupt, there's little surprise that they did, I think that was what I wanted to mention about that. Yeah, China. China is a big story, both in terms of prices, and how it is driving the prices of commodities, which is leading to inflation. And as we all know, and even food inflation can be incredibly destabilizing to regions. Recently, the inflation in Pakistan has dropped. It has gotten better. However, the economists I speak with, they think that the government is going to spend its way to the election, that there's going to be a lot of spending coming up to the election, and that is likely going to, among other factors, lead back to inflation. There's loans they have to pay back. Those kinds of things can be, tricky. And China is going to continue buying every economist I speak with is like the resources in the ground is going to continue to be a story that is about China. It has been for a while, it is going to continue to be. They are what we call vertically integrated, meaning the kind of deals they make for development are very much, we want to control the resource, like we want iron ore for our steel mills, and we want to be able to control the costs all the way down. The one thing I will say though, and this needs to be kept in the context of everything else people are talking about in China, is that they won't sell out a country or an investment just because something bad happens, whereas other shareholders do. So something like South Africa, something bad happens, people start selling shares. You know, China doesn't do that. They stay committed to a project no matter what is happening. I would say there's more around that though. ASEAN is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and they are going to very likely to become a force to be reckoned with as an economic power as well, and that is significant because how many people want mobile phones? I have worked in villages with no running water, but everybody has a mobile phone. And that is metals and plastics, and someone's going to be making those things, much less all of the other products that a lot of these countries, which are starting to become increasingly urbanized and wealthy, they're going to want them. And that means the rocks from the ground have to come from somewhere. And that's going to come likely from the frontier jurisdictions, because they sometimes called riskier jurisdictions, because they're really the ones with a very large amount of resources still to be developed that can interest larger companies. And that really is, what I would like to leave with is maybe, the example of Kurdistan, which I know is a flawed, not a direct parallel, but there are some. And I talk to oil companies that say, they're developing in Kurdistan, and they say, we don't even talk to Baghdad. We talk to the Kurdistan regional government, and that is it. We don't discuss with Baghdad. And they know they're on the record, they're speaking to me, I'm going to publish this. They don't particularly think that's a controversial statement anymore. And so what I would say is, imagine if I said, we don't even talk to Islamabad. We talk to the Balochistan provincial government. And what that implies, because the provincial structures are the port of call for international investors, and you need to think about what that might imply for what kind of provincial government is needed. And I think that's the thought I would leave with. Thank you. I hope I didn't go long.